Good morning and welcome to this formal meeting of the Children's and Culture Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Stuart Grantham and I am the Vice Chair of this committee. In the absence of Councillor Brenda Collier, Chairman of this committee, I'll be acting as Chairman for this meeting. In the absence of the Vice Chair, I would like to invite members to nominate a member to support with Vice Chair duties for this meeting only. Do we have any nominations? Councillor Robson, do we have any nominations?
I'd like to nominate Councillor Robinson.
Do we have a seconder? And Councillor Hume. We will now vote. All in favour of Councillor Robinson being nominated? Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That is carried. Councillor Robinson, please join us on the top table. Thank you. I would like to begin with the health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and out the back of the chamber, and leave the building through the reception into the front car park and wait there for any further instructions. This meeting is being streamed live via the County Council website, and all commitments will remain accessible online after the meeting and can be reported by the media. With this in mind, I would like to welcome members of the public and press watching in our meeting today. Can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and tablets are on silent for the duration of this meeting. The hearing loop is now activated. If you wish to speak, can you please raise your hand and the Vice Chair will take note. And if I may ask all council members, if you can have many questions as they would like to wish, if we can just stick for two so we can have some clarity and the officers can answer reasonably. If we can just stick to two, let them answer, and then you can have another two if you wish to do so. We will now move on to the formal agenda. Item 1, do we have any apologies, Jess?
We do, thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Collier, who will be replaced by Nick Hastings for this meeting, and Councillor Jimmy Brooks, who's replaced by Councillor Barry Dace for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Do any members wish to declare any interest? Thank you very much. This item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting of the Children and Culture Scrutiny Committee, held on the 5th of December 2025, as a correct record. The minutes can be found on pages 5 to 18 of the agenda pack. Do I have a proposer? Thank you. And a seconder? Thank you. We will now vote. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you. Those minutes are agreed as a correct record. Just to make the committee aware, I'm proposing to hold a 10-minute comfort break before item 7 today. Moving on, are there any executive council announcements? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I know this is the first time that committee has met since before Christmas, so I just wanted to congratulate Heather Sandy on behalf of committee for the award of her CBE for her outstanding contribution to children's services and the education system. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, and well done, Heather. Finally, are there any announcements from any of the officers?
No, thank you, Chair.
Item 5, Council Budget for 26-27. This item sets out the 26-27 budget implications for the Council Children's Service and Culture activities. The report was sent out to follow and is available in the agenda item 5 supplementary pack. The actions required by the committee are to consider this report, and members of this committee are invited to make comments on Children's Services and Culture budget proposal. They'll be considered by the Executive at its meeting on the 3rd of February 2026. The report will be presented by Heather Sandy, Executive Director of Children's Services and Deputy Chief Executive, and Nicole Hilton, Assistant Director Communities. We also have Pam Clipson, Head of Financial Services, Mark Pampwell, Strategic Financial Lead Children's Services, Will Mason, Head of Culture, and we also have Pam over on Teams. In attendance to help answer some questions, over to you, Heather.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper sets out the children's services and culture elements of the Council's proposed budget proposals for 26-27. It explains that the Executive considered initial proposals on the 6th of January 2026 and the Council is consulting. The committee's role today is to scrutinise those proposals with regard to children's and culture and to make comments for the Executive to consider ahead of its meeting on the 3rd of February 2026. So Section 1, the background, sets the wider financial context. In paragraphs 1.1 to 1.12, it explains why the Council cost base has increased, what the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement published on the 17th of December means, and what the medium-term position and that the medium-term position can be balanced based on current assumptions, while noting the future risk if demand and costs rise more than forecast. It also explains how the children's services elements are presented, and you'll see that they are split into children's education and children's social care. So children's education is covered in paragraphs 1.13 through to 1.20. This section summarises the main education services and the 26-27 revenue position. It explains that the proposals include savings of 0.410 through operational efficiencies and income revenue, and cost pressures of 1.137 million. The largest pressure is a pressure of 850,000 to maintain additional SEND caseworkers, which had previously been funded from reserves, and this is being put into the budget going forward. That's reflecting the continued growth in education, health and care plans. It also covers funding simplification, and you'll see that the former Household Support Fund and the holiday activities and food funding has been rolled into core funding from 26-27. The children's social care budget is set out in paragraphs 1.12 through to 1.35. It outlines a proposed budget of 138.8 million and explains the scale of cost pressures is at 17.7 million, and we're proposing some savings of 4.7 million. It describes where those savings are expected to come from and includes operational efficiencies, grant maximisation and the Children in Care transformation programme. And it sets out the main pressures, including placements, market costs, fostering allowances, special guardianship orders, inflation and national insurance impacts. Many of those items have been before this committee in a lot of detail previously, and I'm happy to take questions on them a little bit later. It also reinforces the children's services approach around prevention, supporting children safely to stay with their families wherever possible and strengthening local provision. A key point in this section is the additional children's prevention grant, so that's funding of 3.9 million. This is a ring-fence grant to deliver children's social care reforms and enable targeted investment in prevention activity through family help. In practice, it will support earlier intervention so that more children and families can get the right help at the right time, and the aim will be to reduce escalation into statutory social care services and improve outcomes for children. The capital programme for children's services is outlined in paragraphs 1.36 to 1.49. It explains how capital investment will support sufficiency, transformation and value for money. It talks about our new mainstream children's home, supported accommodation for 16 to 17-year-olds, as well as school conditions and maintenance activity and basic need planning. This section also covers investment in SEND and alternative provision sufficiency strategy, which came before this committee, and the updated position on the planned SEMH free school and the different DFE funding approach, which we discussed at the last committee, which is intended to accelerate the delivery of SEND places, and we have our strategy in place to enable us to do that through the Better Belonging strategy. Culture's covered in paragraphs 1.50 to 1.53. The revenue section confirms that culture services, including heritage, archives and libraries, have a proposed budget for 26-27 of 7.8 million. It sets out the cost pressures of 227,000, including 170,000 relating to the renewal of the library service contract, and 63,000 to fund 1.5 additional staff in the archives to support staff and visitors. The capital section then focuses on Lincoln Castle. Paragraph 1.53 explains the capital programme includes 1.9 million in 26-27 for phase 1 of the repair and maintenance programme for the castle walls. It also explains the longer-term maintenance approach assumed in the revenue budget, with planned maintenance programme of 5 million across 27-28 and 28-29, on the basis that the walls will be in an improved condition, and then following that enabling a 0.5 million repair and maintenance programme from 29-30 onwards. It talks about how we are protecting the major heritage asset, and the larger investment up front will reduce the need for higher costs later. The school budget is in paragraphs 1.54 to 1.77. This section explains how the dedicated schools grant is structured, the local approach to mirroring the national funding formula, and outlines our position on high needs. It also sets out the continuing work with partners to bring demand and cost onto a more sustainable footing, and as this committee knows very well, we are awaiting the national SEND reforms to support us to be able to strengthen mainstream inclusion and review arrangements locally. So finally, consultation with the public and partners, and next steps are covered in paragraph 7.8 and 1.78 and 1.79, and the conclusions in section 2. The report emphasises that the consultation comments and this committee's scrutiny views will be available for the executive to consider when it makes its final budget proposals on the 3rd of February 2026. The ask of you today is to scrutinise those proposals, the main cost pressures, the proposed savings, the key risks and assumptions that we've built into those, and to agree any comments you'd like to provide to Executive ahead of the final budget proposals on the 3rd of February. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Eva. I would like now to invite members of the committee to comment on this item. Councillor Robertson, do we have any speakers?
Yep, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Can we be assured that the savings or efficiencies are deliverable without reducing service quality for 26-27? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Smith. So I think it's fair to say I think it's well documented that we're in a financially challenging position, and we need to make some difficult decisions. What I can assure you is that officers have been heavily involved in looking at where we could make those efficiencies and what are the best ways in which we can make those efficiencies. So I think what I can assure you is that we have done a thorough review of all of our services. We've looked at what is statutory. We've looked at what's really important. We've got some valuable services that are non-statutory and that they've been protected through this process. But I am confident that we can make these efficiencies and we can protect the standards and the services that we're getting for children and families across Lincolnshire.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. Thank you, Eva. The question was exactly the same as Councillor Smith's, but I would like to have a bit more confidence in there is not going to be no reduction in any of the services given to the families and children. You mentioned as well about culture, I still can't see how culture and children's services are on the same committee, but hey-ho. There's been a bit of bargee about the castle and the condition of the wall that needs repair, etc. I might be wrong, but over the last year, has the castle ever been closed due to this wall condition?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Clark. I'll answer the first bit and then come on to the second bit. I think what I can assure you is that I am confident in the delivery that will be given to children. I don't think I can say that we won't see any changes to services. I think every time we set a budget, services change and evolve, new services are added, other services change. What I can assure you is that we have had the budget pressures that we've put forward are included in the budget. And I'm confident that we'll deliver at the same standard. I don't think every individual service will be the same. I think, as happens every year when we review what we're doing, look at what's having the most impact, look at new areas of need where we might want to have more impact. So I can assure the committee that the budget pressures that we've put forward have been met, and that, as we always do, and it will come through this committee, any changes in services will be shared, and the rationale behind that will be shared. I'll pass to Nicole to answer the castle.
Okay, so regarding the operations of the castle, the answer is no. There's never been a day when the castle operationally has not been open and available to the public. What I would say is that due to maintenance work or reactive work, certain aspects of the castle experience have been temporarily out of action. For example, certain parts of the castle walls and the wall walk when we've been doing the repairs and the investigations there. But to answer your original question, no, the castle has never been closed due to repairs and maintenance.
Thank you. Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chairman. Can someone tell me why the budget for the castle walls is in culture services when it really should be in property? And if it's no longer in property, when was that decision taken, and why is that budget now in culture? Why does it fall to culture to repair castle walls when it's part of the fabric, not the service delivery?
Thanks, Councillor Corey. So my understanding, and we do have Andy Gutherson here if he wants to chip in. So my understanding is, at this point, this is about the strategic budget proposals. What normally goes through property is once we get into doing the works and decisions around the works. This is about the strategic proposals.
Yeah, thank you. Just a supplementary, and that still doesn't make sense. Why? Is this or is someone making Will? Maybe you can help.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I'm happy to confirm that actually the capital costs are within the property budgets, not within culture budgets.
I think what Councillor Corey's asking is why then is it being presented here? And it's around the strategic overview of the budget. So it sits within the culture. So just as schools and the repairs and maintenance for schools sits within here, because that's a strategic decision but is led and managed by property. That's the same for the castle, is my understanding. That's the decision that's been made.
Yeah, my understanding is the same. It's to ensure that there is that transparency, that any capital costs relating to the operation of culture are captured.
Thank you.
If I may just add something which I hope will help, on this topic. I think I've read somewhere recently in papers that there is an issue that property doesn't come under any of the scrutiny committees at the moment, and that OSMB is looking at that. So that may add some context to why we're considering it here, because there's nowhere else for it to be considered. I don't know. Perhaps Tracy Johnson will know better. Thank you.
Yeah, Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. Currently reports under Growth Scrutiny Committee property, and there is a paper going next week to discuss as to whether all property decisions or reports should go through growth. At the moment, quite a number of them relate to service area, like the castle walls, currently come to the relevant service area committee. So, but there is something that's being looked at in terms of getting a bit more clarity as to where they all sit.
Thank you. I think regardless, it's a great investment in our castle and our culture for the county. So that's great to see. Just a question from myself. I see that we're creating 400 places at 40 new SEND hubs every year over the next 3 years, which will reduce our sufficiency demand by over 50%. I'm also Vice Chairman of the Highway Scrutiny Committee, so I'm interested in any savings long-distance home-to-school transport in the future, and what the potential savings might be come the end of this year, possibly, and how that will benefit children's mental health. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of the mainstream hubs and the rolling out of them, I think we've done a significant piece of work of forecasting what the potential impact of those hubs would be. I won't quote figures because each individual scheme has its own timeline, which if it's delayed by 2 or 3 months, that means 30 places won't come online, which will play through at a significant drift. So I don't want to mislead. Overall, as a strategy, it's almost a 1 to 3 kind of invest to save. So it would be 2/3 cheaper to deliver those placements within mainstream hubs rather than rely on the independent sector or building new provisions. We also know that our criteria for being placed within a hub is evolving. One of the key factors of that is the principle of being educated close to home, and hence the title of better belonging to your community, being able to participate in so much more than education, you know, friendships, social circles, physical activities, etc. And as part of that, we would anticipate transport demand or transport cost reducing because it would already be within their established community. So happy to update, which we would normally do through scrutiny and to the governance board around the impact of that, but strategically it's a very worthwhile investment in provision for a positive impact for lived experience and for financial benefit.
That's brilliant to hear, very promising. Thank you very much. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you very much. Question on 1.46, if I may. It refers to the removal from the capital programme, the 7.2 million, and instead using funding from the DFE of 8.1. So I'm going to assume that this is just removal from our capital programme, then utilising a slightly bigger grant fund from the DFE effectively. I'm assuming the profile and the time frame of the investment would have been the same, whether it was capital programme or grant funding.
Thank you. So in terms of an update around that, the capital side of SEND high need system is quite complicated. So the local authority gets an allocation of capital for us to be able to do mainstream hubs, etc. What this is the abnormals, as it were. It was the risk, the contingency that we have to have. So with the announcement around the free school no longer going ahead, that then releases that reserve for the local authority to be able to protect against abnormals. Abnormals tend to be in Nicole's area, such as historical artefacts and whatnot, and we have to cover those costs. So with the project that going ahead, that money can be released, but it doesn't affect the original capital that we have for SEND and high needs provision.
Sorry, can I come back? So the timescale would have been the exact same, effectively, distributed over the 3 years if it came originally from the capital programme?
So what happened was we bid for a free school with the DFE. The DFE said, yes, you can have a free school, and that's what we were planning to do, and so we budgeted for the abnormals. Then the DFE has changed its position and has taken away funding for a free school, so we don't need the money for the abnormals, but then they've given us back funding, which is for inclusive mainstream hubs. So what we are doing, and we'll come through this committee, is saying, so now we've got that new allocation of resource, how do we utilise that? So the funding that's been removed is funding that was associated with the abnormals for a school that is no longer funded. So we're reviewing our sufficiency position because we've got more funding. There was more funding announced in December, and we've got additional money because of what happened with the free school. So all of that will come through here for consideration.
Thanks for that. Councillor Hume.
Hi, thank you. So I noted on page 8 the national shortage of foster carers, and I think this has been a problem for a very long time. I have noticed some adverts on Facebook, but I wonder how effective overall is our sort of raising of awareness, and is there more we can do there?
Thank you. Thanks very much, Councillor Hume. So we do relatively well with foster carers. And have done for some time. So we look after our foster carers as well as we possibly can. We have strong wrap around our foster carers. We recognise the difference they make to children's lives, and we recognise that as well as being a way to secure really effective outcomes for children, it means children live in a family home and have that experience. Now, in terms of our recruitment and retention, I think we're always working on that. I think you're absolutely right, and I'm glad you've noticed some of it on Facebook. Please do like and share. Please like and share, and make sure it's a Lincolnshire one, because there's a lot of private agencies that are also recruiting for vulnerable children, but we'd like Lincolnshire foster carers if we could. But there's a myriad of factors around why people don't foster, or why they're currently reviewing their decision to foster. So some of that is connected to we give them an allowance as part of the fostering, and I think that some of the pressures that people have seen around disadvantage and around poverty have meant that actually they've needed to move into more flexible working. I want to acknowledge that fostering can be challenging, it can be a joy, and many of the foster carers we talk about how life-changing it was for them and the difference they've made, and many of them are in contact with young people they fostered 30 years ago still. But you know, they do an incredibly amazing job with some really vulnerable children, and sometimes that not everybody's cut out for that. So we have a fostering strategy. We work regionally and locally on that. We lobby government for a national approach to that. You know, we always get really excited. I don't know if anybody's watching The Traitors at the moment, but there's a lovely mum and her adopted daughter on there. Mum works in fostering. That kind of exposure and that kind of story we can't buy. Doctor Who, I think 2 Christmases ago, did a Christmas special on a foster mum, and we saw a spike in people saying, tell me a bit more about this, what does it mean? So we would love to keep promoting it. We'll never be done, because we know how valuable the foster carers are and how much we need them. But I can assure you we have a really clear plan. We're doing relatively well. We always want to be doing better. But we'll always be looking at how we can improve it and keeping up with new ways of recruiting, and making sure that the allowances we give are competitive, and that people want to foster for us and not for private agencies, because when they foster for private agencies, that can be used by other local authorities even though they live in Lincolnshire. So you'll see within the budget proposals, there's proposals around foster carers, around that uplift to their grant, because we recognise that grant is really important, because we're asking people to open up their homes and their lives to children. Thank you for the question, though.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson, was that a follow-up question to this?
It's a separate question to this, but a separate one, if that's okay.
Okay, I'll pop you at the end,
Yeah.
and I'll just put you in the order. Yep, so that's Councillor Cleaver next.
Thank you. I'm concerned about this lovely term, funding simplification, because clearly there's a threat that there's going to be a lack of transparency, because lots of funds are being put into one, and all those things that we used to see separately, like HAF, which is dear to my heart, as you know, will no longer be shown separately. So we've got no knowledge as to whether it's being cut or whether it's being increased or anything. The same obviously applies to the household support grant. So can we please know what the figures are for those two to compare 25.6 with 26.7? If you're able to reassure me now that HAF is going to be expanded, I'll be very happy. But if we can see the figures as well, that would be good. As you know, I've always been campaigning for the eligibility criteria for HAF to be widened, so that more children can benefit from it. But it would be good to have that level. It's good that we shouldn't be losing that level of transparency as a scrutiny committee. That's my first one. My second point is that in the papers for Wednesday's Adult Scrutiny Committee, there is a comment about funds released will allow continuation of the existing Best Start Lincolnshire Early Years and Family Service. The Best Start service is currently funded through the General Fund, but is at risk of reduction due to financial pressures on the Council. And I'm surprised to see that in the Adults Scrutiny Committee, and not mentioned here in our papers. That doesn't seem, frankly, appropriate that the Children's Committee isn't aware of those pressures on the Best Start programme and isn't able to scrutinise how that risk to that funding should best be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Councillor Cleaver. And yes, you have always been a strong advocate of the HAF funding. So just to be clear, that simplification is national. It's not a Lincolnshire issue. And I'll come to Mark. I'll give Mark the heads up. I'll come to you in a minute just to confirm. I think both levels of funding have maintained and improved, and but actually that isn't a local decision. It's a national decision, and we will always report to you on how much we get and what we're doing with it. That is not a problem. So hopefully that's some reassurance around that. But the funding simplification is about how the government funds us. It's not a local budget funding simplification, and we'll continue to report in those ways. Do you want to come in at that point, Mark? Thank you.
Yes, I can. So yes, you can be reassured that we've tracked it through to make sure it is in the revenue support grant. In terms of that simplification, and it's trying to help us in terms of budget planning, essentially, because year on year budgets get agreed in terms of these grants, and it gives us that long-term picture now on HAF, Household Support Fund, which is now the Crisis and Resilient Fund. So it provides that much more greater financial planning. In terms of the budgets, so on 1.2, you'll see there the Crisis and Resilient Fund of 9.9 million. The current year, it's so 9.9 million. In the current year, it's 9.6 million. So a modest increase on that. But essentially, we will still need to report on that. So central government will still expect us to spend in line with the grant conditions. So there'll be conditions attached with those funding streams. And actually, it is evolved since the current Household Support Fund 7. So this is what we're working through at the moment, and there will be a subsequent committee paper going to the executive in terms of how we work in line with those conditions, but also to meet those vulnerable families at what they term as financial shock. So 3-year agreement, which we'll be working through the solutions for that. In terms of the Holiday Activity Fund, so that's 2.981 million for next year. Current year is 2.8. So again, a modest increase in that, but essentially it's there for the same purpose as what was set out originally within those households holiday activity fund criteria. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And then on to the Integrated Lifestyle Service. So the paper that's going to adults is about this year and is about decisions that they're making that will come into effect next year. This budget paper is around this year's budget, I think it is, and I think I've been really clear, all non-stat services are being reviewed. The council is under financial pressure, so that service is a non-statutory service. It's not currently involved in any of these budget proposals, so it's not within this budget paper. Should we get to the point where there is a need, because we're going to do any work on that, it would come through this committee. But the decision that's going to adults is to have impact next year, and therefore this committee would consider it depending on the outcome of that throughout the next cycle.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you very much. I've got several pieces, but they're not all on the same subject. So do you want me to do them one at a time?
You can do 2 at a time, unless you think one of them is going to be quite long-winded.
Okay, thank you. 1.16, it says a further proposed saving relates to forecast increased income for services and full cost recovery of traded activities with schools. The question I've got there is, these activities, can the schools back away from them and not partake of them? And if we are increasing the cost to them and they do back away because they decide it's not value for money to them, is that going to create even more cost pressures because you're spreading the service over less contributors to it?
I'll take that one now and then we'll come back. So what this is about making sure that where we are providing a service to schools that is not statutory, that we are recovering the cost to the council. And so, again, each year we review how much we're charging. We look at, are we covering our costs, because we shouldn't be subsidising those schools who buy from our services. And so it's just ensuring that we are doing that full cost recovery. If schools were to step away from those services, and we've got no indication that they will, we're still, to be honest, when the council does provide a service, it tends to be cost effective, and if they want to step away, then what we would do is make sure they're stepping away into a service that meets their need, and then we would scale down and scale up appropriately. So all of the services that we trade are traded on a model where we scale down and we scale up, so it wouldn't be that less schools left would pay more, we would scale down the service to those schools. But I'm not envisaging that being a problem. These are modest uplifts, and to ensure that we are making sure that we are covering the council's cost while helping the schools with the service. And then again, with the increased forecast in income, it's about making so that's about making sure again that we are capturing all of our costs, and that we're making sure that what we're trading is traded at an appropriate level, because again, if we undercut the market, then sometimes that's problematic as well. But I think that answers it. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it does. The next one is 1.24. This partly was answered about whether the services are going to go down. It says here, operational delivery efficiencies and vacancy management are part of what you're going to look at to reduce the cost. The vacancies, are they current vacancies? Are they future vacancies? If they're current vacancies, have they been fulfilled during this year? And how are we going to avoid a reduction in service if that's vacancies that we're not filling?
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. So again, I think, Councillor Rowe, you're quite familiar with this. In some of our areas, we have a high level of turnover, and that's usually for really positive reasons, because people get promoted and people move into other areas. And we see that we always have a lag where someone's moved on, we're recruiting, and those areas can underspend regularly. This is about tightening that up and recognising that we will have a level of vacancy. I can assure you that's all been done with the relevant managers, with the relevant assistant directors, and they are confident that that's at an appropriate level. And that we are confident we can deliver the service. I think it's probably fair to acknowledge that as well as those vacancy factors, we've put significant cost pressures into this budget where we think we can't have a vacancy and actually we need more staff. We have put those cost pressures in which far outweigh some of the vacancy factors. So it's making sure we've got the right staff in the right place to be able to deliver this. But I'm confident to assure you that we will be delivering services to the same high quality and that those vacancy factors are not an element that the team are concerned about.
Thank you. Within that same paragraph, 1.24, it says this 610,000 grant maximisation opportunities, and it says, a further proposed saving relates to grant maximisation opportunities in accordance with grants conditions of existing spending commitments. Does that mean that in the past we haven't maximised the opportunity of those grants? Or does it mean the grants have increased? Or does it mean that we haven't been spending the money as we should have been?
Thank you. So I think it's a bit of a mix, if I'm honest, Councillor Rowe. I think we've had increases to grants, and we talked about the prevention grant. And we talked about the fact that you'll know we've got lots of preventative services in Lincolnshire that we've funded from core. We're keen to expand those. We're going through the social care reforms. We're keen to have that early intervention. What this means is some of that funding will allow us to do that, to protect those services and to enhance them further. I think there are other grants where you have a choice about how to use them, and we have some grants that actually have underspent regularly and build up reserves, and it's about saying we need to utilise those in year. Yeah. The financial context changes what you do with grants, doesn't it? And so instead of building up those reserves around certain budgets, actually how do we allocate them for the spending that they're intended to? So I think it's a mixture of all of that, but mostly it's to do with, there are some new grants in children's services, there are amalgamation of grants, so it's making sure we're allocating all of that. And now that we've got more permanent funding, as Mark's just explained, to some of our areas, we can begin to ensure that everything's coded to the right grant and we're maximising them in year.
The other 2 points are pretty quick, so if it's okay, I'll just finish it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I wasn't concentrating because they brought my computer back. Did we say that the half funding is ring-fenced, even though, great stuff, thank you. And the other was just purely a comment where I wanted to say how pleased I am, and I hate to sort of compliment the current government, but I read in here that there are actions being taken to stop this profiteering of private homes. Does that expand to private fostering and adoption as well?
Not yet.
We'll keep our fingers crossed.
Thank you. Yeah, I would agree. And what I think we're really keen, and one of the things that links to the SEND is really we're pushing and we're lobbying for that consideration to be given to independent special schools as well. How we make sure that they are high quality, fair cost, because the taxpayer is obviously paying a lot of money for those places, and it's making sure they're delivering what we need in the right way.
Thank you. Councillor Hastings.
Thank you, Chair. How does the budget strengthen our ability to support children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities in a timely way?
Thank you, Councillor Hastings. I think this is a really positive budget for our children with SEND. I've talked about those capital announcements. I think that puts us in a really different position, and actually that budget announcement came late in December, so has been included in the budget proposals and is a really exciting opportunity. So this committee has previously endorsed the Better Belonging strategy to the executive, and the council is now adopted the Better Belonging strategy, which is where we build specialist school places on mainstream hubs with specialist staff in who can support children and support the wider school, reduce children's travel time, allow them to have social time with the rest of their peers, and has been really well received by schools and by parents and carers. So I think the capital part of this budget is really important. We're desperately wanting to have sufficiency of SEND school places in the right areas, and this gives us the capability to be able to do that. I think that for SEND services, the permanent base funding for the case workers is really important. So we've had a pressure in SEND, which I know many of you are aware of, for a long time, and we've had a temporary uplift in there. This budget acknowledges that that is going to need to be permanent, so that gives us more permanent staff, which means we'll have less turnover. They can work with more stability in terms of their role. And also, as we come up to the national SEND reforms, it gives us a stable team to deliver those, and I think that's going to be really important for us and for schools and for families and carers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. It's on 1.65, the issue of the DSG reserves. I think obviously everyone here is aware of the issue of the DSG deficit. Are we effectively waiting for the white paper from the government on this before we're able to put forward a solution? Is that where we're at the moment? Because obviously the reserve spend isn't sustainable over a prolonged period of time at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. So no, I don't think we have done that. I think we've worked really proactively. So this Lincolnshire County Council has invested significant money in special school places and is continuing to do so and changing the strategy around mainstream hubs, but we have had historically a big expansion to our special schools. We've worked really hard with our mainstream schools. We've done innovative actions to try and reduce that. So I guess what I would say is, no, we haven't. We absolutely are not just saying, well, we can't do anything about that, therefore we'll wait for those SEND reforms to come. And I think Martin brings a paper every year to talk about what we're doing about that. And also Martin presented to Audit Committee, who did a deep dive into this to give assurance about it. So we're definitely not waiting for national reforms. I do accept that the overspend is unsustainable. I think the challenge is there is a limit to what we can do locally, because some things are legislated for, some things currently are really hard for us to say no to. Even if we think that's the right decision, it's really difficult for us to say no, because then we tend to lose in the legal field. And also it's really difficult for parents then, because the parents feel they have to go through a really extensive legal process with the council. So no, I don't feel that we're waiting. We are in a better position than loads of other authorities. We were amongst the last group of local authorities to move into the overspend. I agree, it's unsustainable. It's not where we want to be. We won't do nothing even between now and the announcement. But the announcement is a position that local authorities cannot solve alone. They need national change.
I suppose really that was the crux of my question, that I absolutely appreciate we're doing everything we can. We have to meet these responsibilities. I completely get it. But obviously, if the national reform doesn't come in the way that we need it, we are very exposed, because it's a lot of money that we are having to pump out, either in terms of the cash flow or even if we invest through the capital programme. It's a massive amount of money that we're going to have to find. So we are a little bit reliant, I suppose, aren't we, on the national reform bailing us out effectively. Otherwise, we're in a bit of a sticky one.
Thank you. I'll just go with Councillor Dage first, because he hasn't spoken yet, and then I'll go back to the original order. Thank you.
Hi there. Can you outline for me which elements of the proposed budget mostly directly protect the safety and well-being of the children, and how we will be able to monitor that impact through the year?
Thank you, Councillor Dage. So in terms of the safety of children, there are a number of proposals within this budget. I think the key one, if I'm honest, is around the cost pressures we've put forward. So the cost pressures we've put forward, and I can go through them in a little bit of detail if my slide will download, which it isn't at the minute. I might have to go and sit next to Mark so I can read his screen. So the cost pressures are around things like special guardianship orders, around the payments we give to foster carers, around the SEND caseworkers, as I've just discussed. So what we're prioritising in this budget is our response to families. And then we've got our early prevention grant as well, which is prioritising getting in early and de-escalating need. On top of that, what this budget does is confirm that we'll be continuing with those social care reforms in this committee. And I know that you're not always on this committee, but it has looked at what we've been doing around the social care reforms and the Pathfinder. That is about us intervening early, making children's families as safe as they can be, and helping to stabilise family life, which we know leads to better outcomes, and we know is a more cost-effective way as well to intervene in family life. So I would say this budget is, it has got children at the heart of it. Obviously, it's got castle walls as well. But, you know, the proposals for the children's section have got children at the heart of it, and it's been done from a protection first through early intervention. And I think it's really cemented our early intervention approach with regard to where we've put forward those cost pressures and the prioritisation. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I take you to page 7, paragraph 1.29? This is about the independent specialist placements that my colleague, I think, touched on. So if I'm right, these now cost approximately £72,000 a year. And we've heard that these providers are making excess profits. Chairman, if this is so, then why is the executive taken the decision to take money from mainstream classrooms to fund this market model? And has the executive considered investing in a council-led model that would support these children at a fraction of the cost?
Sorry, Councillor Corey, is it section 1.29 you're on? Yeah, so that's children's social care, that's the private children's homes. I can assure you that the mainstream hubs are not making excessive profit, that they're funded, and they are much more cost effective than the independent ones. It's the section 1.29, and where it talks about the excessive profits, that is about the independent children's homes, when we can't find a placement for a child and we have to place them. And nationally, what has been seen is that though that sector has been bought up by private equity, and that actually they are, it's become a very profitable area. I think someone said to me, once you see private equity investing in a sector, it's very profitable. So what the DFE is going to do is the DFE is going to intervene and cap profits and ask for transparent budgeting of those provisions. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarity. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brough.
Thank you once again. One question and then a comment. I didn't hear 1.46, so this is where we are no longer going to be needing the 7.251 million for the private school. I didn't hear where that 7.251 million was going.
So what it was originally budgeted for was to pay for the abnormals within the site. So it was to do, if we came across any abnormals in the site, that we would use that in order to do that, because that's what the council has to fund and the DFE funds the places. So we're not doing that school site now, and the government funding is allowing us to deliver the mainstream hubs without the need to do the abnormals. So so that funding is no longer needed, so we don't need to do that borrowing anymore, because we're getting the funding through a grant. Does that help?
So the 7.251 it was available. Where is it now?
No, it was future borrowing. We're not going to need to do it.
We were going to borrow, so we're not going to borrow.
Yeah.
Great, I understand that.
Thank you.
The other one was just to back up something you said earlier. There was a question about fostering and how we can help. And as chairman of corporate parenting, I keep nagging. We have 70 counsellors. Those 70 counsellors visit, I don't know how many hundred parish councils, town councils. Please take the message to those people and ask them to spread it. I sit on a district council as well, as do some of the others. Please do the same thing again. Let's get the message out. And it is an important point that Heather made, and that is that I've read fostering adverts twice sometimes and think, oh, that's not one of ours. Please make sure it's got LCC on it. Thank you for allowing me to do that advert.
Yeah, can I just, Chair, can I just add to Councillor Rowe's please? So Corporate Parenting Panel last week asked us to put together a kind of really high-level overview that can be shared with all councillors, so that they can do a bit of promotion and so that they feel that they're confident when they go into the parish council. So this committee's probably got councillors who are much more confident about that, because you're hearing that work day in, day out. But we're going to be putting together something to go to every councillor that they might want to share with their parish councils. Thank you.
Brilliant. Councillor Cleaver.
Thank you. I know we don't have the Section 151 officer present, but on the top of the report, could I ask for a little bit of clarity from somebody, because Section 1.1 talks about opportunities to reduce costs to help mitigate the forecast medium-term financial plan deficit from 26/7 onwards. However, Section 1.6 tells us that as a result of the council moving to a higher funding base over the 3-year local government funding settlement, the current projection is that the council can balance its budget across all the years of the 26 to 30 medium-term financial plan. those two things appear to contradict each other on the face of it. I would think we'd all welcome some clarity as to what the position really is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cleaver. So and if Pam or Mark want to come in, I'm happy for you to take it.
Yeah, so as part of the budget process this time last year, we were forecasting a future deficit. So hence why what Heather described about going through a fundamental review of all of our services to identify possible opportunities and savings and efficiencies. And essentially that work has now been brought to the committee and the other committees in terms of saying that following that action, following the fair funding announcement and that medium-term plan in terms of what the government have set out, we can now set a balanced budget going forward. So this is now an updated position from what was there this time last year. So we've now, through the programme of works, been able to manage that position.
I think in terms of what Mark's explained it, but in terms of the report, 1.1 is saying we did have a budget deficit. So we have been through a comprehensive review of budgets to address that. And then it talks about how we've done that. Then 1.6 is saying as a result of that, we're now able to set a balanced budget. It's just trying to outline the process that the council's been through. Does that make sense?
I mean, the inference in 1.6 is that it's the government's fair funding settlement for 3 years that means that we can balance its budget from 26 to 26-30 medium-term financial plan. It doesn't. 1.6 doesn't mention the fact that we've already agreed cuts for 26-7 over 25-6. Which change it. 1.6 says that government additional funding means that we can now balance its budget across all years of the 26-30 medium-term financial plan.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that feedback back, but I think in fairness, we've had to do the mixture of all of it. Having been part of all of those budget meetings, I can assure you we've had to do all of that process that's outlined in order to get to the position we've got in 1.6.
Can I just say then, I hope that it's more clearly set out when it comes to full council. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yeah, just a final question from here for me. So in paragraph 1.29 on page 7, the children in care cost pressures of £13.9 million is very concerning. It mentions that this is necessary to meet current baseline commitments and future requirements and placements. How have the costs for the future high demand been identified, and how confident are you that this cost pressure will be sufficient?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So, these are demand-led budgets. I am confident. We've done meticulous budget planning around this. We've looked at the ages of children. We've looked at what's happened in the last 3 years, the last 4 years, the last 5 years. What can we expect? So I am confident that they are the best predictions that we can do. We've worked with finance, we've worked with performance. The reality of children's services, as you know, is that we are demand-led. So whenever we set a budget, say we set a budget for 10 children to come into care, when we get to the 11th child, we can't say, no, we can't bring you into care because we haven't got the budget. We would bring them in. So I am confident they are the best projections. I'm confident they've been challenged and they've been scrutinised, and we've worked with our colleagues in finance and with the corporate leadership team, and they've been interrogated. But I am absolutely clear, and I say this every year to this committee, they are the very best projections that we can do, and we will work really hard to deliver within that budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the decision of this item. I propose that the committee supports the Children and Services Culture Budget proposal for 26-27 and that our comments be passed on to the Executive for consideration on the 3rd of February. Our comments have been captured by Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, for passing on to the Executive. Can you please raise your hand if you agree? Okay. Thank you, that is agreed. Right, move on to the next item. Oh, sorry, Councillor Corey.
Yeah, do you not asking if any of us are abstaining, Chairman?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, is anybody abstaining? Sorry about that. And we've got 3. Sorry. So we'll move on to the next item. Sorry about that. Item 6, mainstream school funding for 26-27. This item invites the committee to consider whether it supports the principles and approach outlined in the report regarding mainstream school funding for 26-27. The report was sent out to follow and is available in the agenda item 6 supplementary pack. The action required by the committee are to 1. Consider the contents of this report and determine whether the committee supports recommendations being made to the Executive Councillor for Children's Services on the basis of the principle and approach as set out in the report. 2. Agree any conditional comments to be passed on to the Executive Councillor in relationship to this item. The report will be presented by Mark Bebel, Strategic Financial Lead, Children's Services. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Yes, so this is a report on the mainstream schools funding formula for 26-27. So since the introduction of the government's national funding formula in 1819 for mainstream schools, Lincolnshire has adopted that national funding increase per pupil funding levels received. It currently remains the council's decision to set its schools funding formula within the department's schools funding framework. So essentially it's our decision in terms of setting mainstream schools budgets for 26-27. The dedicated schools grant is a ring-fence grant that funds the core education costs. Within that dedicated schools grant is the schools block allocation for the council, which funds that mainstream schools budgets. So the council funding is determined through the aggregation of schools' notional allocations under a national funding formula arrangement using the latest pupil numbers but prior year pupil-led characteristics. And Table 1 provides that summary where Lincolnshire sits nationally on terms of schools funding that comes into the local authority, of which we then use to determine schools budgets. So overall, core schools funding has increased by 1.7 billion nationally, a 2.6% increase in 26-27, bringing total core funding to 67 billion in 26-27, and this is expected to rise to 69.5 billion by 28-29. So of the 67 billion, 50.9 million of that is relating to mainstream schools funding. Lincolnshire Schools Block is 646 million, so a significant sum. To note, within the primary school sector of the schools block, Lincolnshire is actually experiencing a decline in the number of primary age pupils, a trend that has also been evident nationally in terms of lower birth rates. So overall, as a context, funding levels, bear in mind it's based on a pupil-led formula, there'll be lower sums going within the primary sector as a result. Section 1.8 to 1.13 provides context of the department's directive to bring councils' local mainstream funding formulas closer to the national funding formula, hence tightening the funding framework relating to that. So Lincolnshire continues to adopt the national funding formula, but due to lag data used to fund schools, to fund the council's schools block, there is affordability gaps that have taken place in recent years. And that's been born from the free school meals eligibility, where we've seen an increase in eligibility and therefore creating that funding, caused by the funding lag, which is then creating that affordability gap. So in the current year, we had to actually reduce a formula factor, which is a pupil-led formula factor called the age-weighted pupil unit value, by 0.361% to ensure that the local authority could fund an affordable mainstream schools funding formula. Appendix A sets out the government's national funding formula structure, which then sets out the government's national funding formula structure for determining school mainstream budgets. These include proxy pupil-led formula factors, which 80% is required to go through the pupil-led formula factors. Appendix B sets out the 26-27 DFE monetary values, of which the council is aiming to fulfil in adopting the national funding formula subject to affordability. Section 1.14 sets out the key funding formula updates for 26-27. The fundamental principles of the government's national funding formula are not changing for 26-27. So drawing out the key highlights, formula factors are typically rising by 2.11%, which shows a tightening of the fiscal funding policy for schools in 26-27. Separate grants received in 25-26 are being rolled into the national funding formula for 26-27. The highest level of the minimum funding guarantee per pupil protection of 0% will apply. Therefore, no schools will see a reduction in its per pupil-led funding value. A continuation of the primary school's rent factor relating to school premises factor under the exceptional circumstance criteria. So with the sector and the Schools Forum having supported Lincolnshire's decision to continue adopting the national funding formula, the recommendation is for the continued application of the national funding formula subject to that affordability that I've referred to. Section 1.19 to 1.122 explains the outcomes of the school's consultation with mainstream schools undertaken in the autumn. The results were shared with the Schools Forum at its committee on the 27th of November 25. So support was received for the Council's current approach to making a downward adjustment to the key stage age-weighted pupil unit value across the sector should affordability arise in adopting the national funding formula, following a review of the growth and falling roll school block budget requirements. So the Council does consider a downward adjustment to provide a sector-wide solution and has the least impact on each school's budgets. This is therefore before formula protection arrangements are applied. So they also supported the higher range of the minimum funding guarantee of 0% to temporarily support schools' short-term financial planning in terms of that stability, and also supported the primary rents factor for premise-related deemed exceptions. So the government published to councils the latest October 25 census information on the 17th of December for 26-27 funding purposes. Officers have therefore been working through the process to determine mainstream schools' budgets reflecting the DFE updates and also the local decisions made. To provide an update, the affordability gap shortfall to adopt the national funding formula in its entirety, including the 0% minimum funding guarantee, is 3.3 million due to that lagged funding characteristics. And again, what we've seen in terms of the data is the free school meals over 6 continued increase, and also a higher proportion of pupils meeting the primary level lower prior attainment threshold, added with the lower pupil numbers. The Council is unable to set an affordable formula based on that. Therefore, following a review of the school's growth and fall in roll funding, 821,000 will be released from that budget to part fund that affordability gap, leaving just short of 2.5 million. This will be then managed through a reduction in the key stage age-weighted pupil unit by 0.612%, meaning reductions in all pews across the schools between a range of £25 per pupil to £39 per pupil from the national funding formula rates. The Schools Forum also agreed a school block transfer of 0.5% to the high needs block to support that continued investment in high needs initiatives, to support those improved outcomes for pupils with SEND and to assist with a more cost-effective financial system, but also an effective system of delivery. The 0.5% school block transfer will be managed through a downward reduction in the key stage weighted ORPU, just like affordability, and that reflects that shared responsibility across the sector with our partners. The 3.2 million, which represents that 0.5%, will result in a downward adjustment of 0.83% of the age-weighted pupil values, which is on a range of £34 to £53 per pupil, depending on the level of key stage. Therefore, as a result of the affordability in the school block transfer, we've seen a 1.4% reduction in the age-weighted pupil units, which represents between £58 to £92 per pupil. Lincolnshire are considered to be continued to mirror the national funding formula within these agreed ranges because it's within the 2.5% range. School budgets must be published by the 28th of February. And currently at the moment, a submission has been made to the department to ensure compliance with the Finance Schools and Finance Early Years regulations. So for 26-27, the policy decision is to continue adopting that national funding formula outlined, along with the measures to address the affordability gap, and then also the steps relating to the school block transfer. And this is pre-scrutiny discussions in readiness for executive councillor decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I would now like to invite members of the committee to comment on this item. Councillor Robertson, do we have any speakers?
Yeah, Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. Looking at the actual increase in figures coming from the DFE, they are never increasing them in line with inflation. So every single year, they're effectively delivering us a decrease in total funding, so giving us a cost pressure year on year. I suppose that puts us in a very difficult situation. Obviously, we're not even getting half of inflation in terms of our pay increase at the 1.5. So our cost pressures, unless the requirement and the service decreases, we're going to be given more of a cost pressure year on year because of the rising costs just in general day-to-day spending. Is there anything that we can do in terms of lobbying the DFE with partner councils to say, if you don't give us a pay rise in line with inflation, you're delivering further cost pressures on top of the already short budget that we have? Is there anything we can do to lobby them directly?
Yes, I think in terms of you've sort of picked up the tightening of that fiscal policy. The current year was really tight. The government did step into a part fund, the pay awards, and one hopes that they will do the same for 26-27, but it was part funded, and they were very much focused on schools need to try and be more efficient, improve productivity, but certainly the schools forum made representation back to me in terms of some of the language the DFE used, and thought it was quite unhelpful, that actually they're already doing that. They are already trying to be really lean in terms of and efficient in terms of how they operate. So that will be something that I can take forward onto national colleagues. We've represented that tightened policy, but overall I would say that schools are in a good financial position, so with reserves. Limited schools with deficits, however, it's that future years where they are seeing that there's going to be more challenging times ahead. And so we really quite agree that raising these points is important to the department to be reflective in terms of their discussions with the Treasury, but it is a much tightened financial settlement. And also just to add in terms of the pupil numbers, it's a pupil-led formula. And again, what we're seeing in certain areas of schools where we are seeing fall in roles, and again, that will be a new challenge that will be coming. And this isn't just locally in Lincolnshire, this is something that we've been seeing nationally as well.
Yeah, I suppose that, as you mentioned there, there's nothing necessarily that we can do about it. We get given what we get given. But if schools are already lean, already looking to utilise reserves, if you're introducing, say, this year, for example, a 1.7% decrease in actual funding by not moving it in line with inflation, you're asking already lean schools to make even further cuts. It's not really sustainable for a lot of those schools having to utilise reserves. So if there's anything that we can do to help lobby the DFE, then that's going to help protect our young people, not just here, but across the country. I think it'd be a real benefit.
Absolutely, thank you. Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chairman, and it's on the same vein as Councillor Parkinson, page 4, 1.13, where we are told that schools are supportive of the 0.5% schools block transfer, but if I may refer members to page 38 of Appendix A of a letter dated 22nd of October 2025. It is available to members on modern.gov. From this authority to chairs of governors, head teachers and all Lincolnshire maintained schools and academies, which states clearly, Chairman, that in answer to question 4 pertaining, that an overwhelming 80% of secondary schools that responded were against the 0.5% block transfer. Given that these schools are responsible for our most complex educational outcomes, can someone tell me why this decision was, or this conclusion was drawn, and why they now want to, or the executive wants to force through a policy that the overwhelming majority, 80%, Chairman, of our secondary heads have rejected as not fair or sustainable? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. What I would firstly say is that unfortunately the representation or the response rate that we received from schools was low. It was only circa about 5%, unfortunately. But the decision-making powers relating to the school block transfer is actually the schools forum decision. And the schools forum discussed, debated, and we have representatives from secondary sector relating to, of which some of those actually responded during that consultation exercise. But overall, they felt it was the right position to continue supporting those high needs activities for the benefit of all, although appreciating it does result in a reduction in their overall funding from the national funding formula rate. So it was the schools forum's decision that was taken. But also, we felt it was appropriate that to not go further than the 0.5%, even allowing for the challenges that we're seeing in terms of the high needs position, which is in excess of 26 million in the current year and will grow in future years. And also, just to note, the DFE cash flat position for 26-27, which again was disappointing, which isn't going to help things. But the schools forum are a representative body for the sector. And obviously representing their own individual sectors as well, but it was an overriding vote, and they supported that 0.5 transfer for 26-27. And this is only for 1 year, and we would have to go through this annual process to seek further future school block transfers if necessary.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, a supplementary and then a slight progression, but someone who was at that meeting doesn't share your view of that, but that's for them. But so if I take you to page 5, table 2, that shows a reduction for Key Stage 4 pupils, and that reduction is 85.76. So for a large secondary school of, say, about 1,200 pupils, that is a core budget loss of around £100,000 a year. So can you then tell me, Mark or someone else, why someone who was at that meeting calls this a stealth tax? And how schools, can you tell me how schools can be expected to set a balanced budget while simultaneously absorbing teacher pay awards while also carrying this extra budget pressure? I'm aware that you said that protection funding will be forwarded, but I'm told that this will not be sufficient to cover this affordability gap.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Corey, I just want to be really clear when you talk about somebody having a different reflection. I don't want it suggested that Mark's misled this committee. So Martin was also at that meeting.
No, I get
sorry,
that,
sorry. I just
yes.
want to clarify that vote did go through. There were representatives of the secondary sector on there, and so somebody else feeling differently about how that went through is not. It's not a different recollection. Mark has presented exactly what happened at the meeting, and I think it's important that the committee know that.
I take that, Heather. Thank you.
And then I'll let Mark or Martin come on to the detail.
Yeah, thank you. So I think following on from that conversation, I think it's worthwhile noting as well that within that space of financial management, obviously schools' budgets are ring-fenced through the schools block. The high needs block is ring-fenced in itself. The only way to truly protect early intervention and support services when you've got a cost pressure of growing degrees, which we have, is for that 0.5% block transfer to take place. And I think when you think about the conversation that we had at the Schools Forum, which was a dynamic discussion around schools are also spending that money. So the secondary school leaders, for example, who don't like the block transfer, by their direct actions such as high needs or particularly permanent exclusions, that is spending the high needs block for us. So it might be, for example, £100,000 from a secondary school, but to the local authority, the consequence of us having to provide sixth day provision could be in the region of 1.3 million for that cohort. So it costs them 100,000, but it costs the local authority who's managing that risk 1.3 million. So it is a bit of a shared responsibility, and I would emphasise that shared responsibility between schools. And I also appreciate, having visited a school with Councillor Oliver recently, for some schools, he gets why we have to pay into it in the 0.5 block transfer, but he also notes, I don't really call a lot on that demand-led system, but he's okay with it, if that kind of makes sense. But it's an elected forum, so the school leaders elect their representatives. The discussion is had, the debate is had, we hear all of the views, it's recorded, and it was put to the vote, and they conceded to support that decision, although originally opposed some of it.
Thank you. Councillor Cleaver.
Thank you. You mentioned falling rolls being a problem nationally, but obviously in Lincolnshire, with our rurality, we have a combination of falling rolls in small schools to start with. So I notice from the papers for the next item on the agenda that we actually have 21 primary schools with a PAN of 10 or fewer. And obviously there has to be some mitigation in the formula to prevent schools that are that small from not being able to function, clearly. And so there is clearly a diseconomy of scale on quite a large scale if you've got 21 schools that are recruiting so few pupils. So I think my basically saying, when does push come to shove? How sustainable are those schools if they don't achieve their PAN, and in the context of again continuing falling birth rate, falling rolls, where does this go? Because to keep sustaining them, you're taking money away from other schools to sustain those very small schools. How's that going to work in the long term?
Thank you, Councillor Cleaver. So small schools are a really important part of the tapestry of education in Lincolnshire. We know we've got lots of really tiny village schools, and very often I talk to the committee about how London-centric policies that are developed are really difficult sometimes to apply in Lincolnshire, where we just don't have that pupil number and that pupil size. I think the decision about whether a school is viable or not is one for its governing body. And it really varies in different places. So some schools are really valuable, set a really healthy, balanced budget and deliver high quality outcome with quite a low number of pupils. Others work together to do that and share resources. Others join a trust to seek the protection of a larger organisation. I think your question around where does push come to shove is about, I think what you're asking, I just want to check, is what's the council's position on it? Yeah, and our council does not currently have a small school strategy. In the past, when there's been any discussion about that, we are really clear when that small schools are part of the tapestry, and each closure has a big effect on a village or a community, and so we would want to support them to stay viable as long as possible. But that's certainly something that I'm sure will be considered in the round as these things come through.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, 1.14 says about how funding is, for each child. Page 12, it says lump sum, every school attracts a lump sum. If a school is part of an academy and the academy or the trust is outside of Lincolnshire, will it go to the school or will it go to the trust?
So in terms of how the formula is set, it's based on each individual school. So each individual school will receive its determined budget, which will include a lump sum and then all the other pupil-led factors. So that will form part of an academy's general annual grant, so of which maintained and academies will receive exactly the same level of funding based on their own school characteristics and pupil-led characteristics. It is then, as part of an academy, it's up to their decision as trustees in terms of how that money is allocated and spent. Essentially, a similar arrangement in terms of for maintained schools and the governing body. But clearly, from an academy perspective, it's sort of reflective of their trust, their schools in the trust. And it's their decision in terms of how monies are deployed. But in terms of how we allocate the funding, this is as set out here, and it's determined consistently for each school, whether they're maintained or an academy.
Okay, any further questions? No, that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Just a last question for me, Mark, if that's all right. At the top of page 6, it states that 1 billion authority was unable to agree to the new billing payment methodology for 26-27. Can you explain what the issues or concerns were for that billing authority not to agree to the new methodology?
Thanks, Chair. I mean, this is something that we've been trying to pursue for a number of years now. We felt that we had everyone on board because there is effectively reduced administration as a result of this, but obviously there's a bit of a start-up cost involved in the districts in getting those systems ready, but in the long term there's huge benefits. Unfortunately, that district, due to resourcing, was unable to do that. So we feel quite comfortable and confident that we can actually implement this for 27-28. So that will hopefully improve things from a district council perspective, timing of the payments as well. And what we have seen in terms of local authorities that have moved on to that is normally those unitaries, where they obviously have this in their, all within their own authority. So what we are seeing, the sort of the two-tier authorities, maybe a bit later coming on board on this, but as I say, we've been pushing this, we've been working hard with the districts. Unfortunately, we didn't make it for 26-27, but we do have ambitions to move on that in 27-28. But fundamentally, all districts need to sign up to it, and that's essentially where we fell down for 26-27.
Thank you very much for all your comments and questions. Now this concludes the decision of this item. I propose that we support recommendations being made to the Executive Councillor for the Children and Services on the basis of principles and approach as set out in the report, and that our comments be passed on for consideration by the Executive Councillor. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Parkinson, thank you. The comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, for passing on to the Executive Councillor. We will now vote on this item. All those in favour? Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. That is now carried. We will now have a 10-minute conference break and restart at 25 to 12, please. Thank you. We will now move on to item 7, the school admissions policies and coordinated schemes for 27 intake. This item is on page 19 to 102 of the agenda pack and is for pre-decision scrutiny prior to the decision by the Executive Councillor for Children's Services between the 28th of January and 27th of February 2026. The actions required by the committee are to 1. Consider the attached report and determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Children's Services as set out in the report. 2. Agree an additional comment to be passed on to the Executive Councillor in relation to this item. The report will be presented by Jessica Hart, School Admissions Manager. We also have Emily Nichols, Admissions and Education Provisions Manager, in attendance to help answer any questions. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Chair. I'm here to discuss the proposals to change the Lincolnshire primary and secondary coordinated schemes to allow applicants to name 4 preferences as opposed to 3 on their school application forms, along with the proposal to amend the Lincolnshire County Council primary admissions policy to reduce Quaidring, Cowley and Brown Primary School published admission number from 16 to 15. Both of these proposals relate to 2027 entry to schools. As the admission authority for community and voluntary controlled schools within Lincolnshire, Lincolnshire County Council are legally required to determine admissions policies for these schools. And as a local authority, we must establish a coordinated admission schemes for Lincolnshire to outline how applications to the local authority will be processed. These duties are essential, and without them, the Council would be in breach of their obligations. The recommendations before you uphold those duties whilst aiming for better outcomes for the children and parents of Lincolnshire. We propose to amend the coordinated admission schemes for both primary and secondary schools so that applicants may express up to 4 preferences on their applications forms. This change is designed to support realistic local choices by enabling parents to include an additional nearby school. We reduce the likelihood of children being placed far from home when preferred schools are full. In turn, this can ease pressure on school transport, resulting in lower associated costs for the council, along with improved parental satisfaction. Importantly, the 4th preference is optional. Families are able to utilise it if they feel it would be beneficial. Equally, if families believe it to be unnecessary, there is no mandatory requirement for a 4th school to be named. We consulted on these proposals between the 1st of October and the 12th of November 2025, and of the 93 respondents, 54% agreed with increasing preferences from 3 to 4, 32 opposed the change, and 14 were unsure. Among the 46 respondents, who are parents of children aged 2 to 18, half agreed, 37 disagreed, and 13 were unsure. Those in favour highlighted better outcomes for families who do not secure any of their initial preferences, a wider range of options to consider, and particular benefits for oversubscribed and rural areas where daily travel routes matter. Our expectation is that the 4th preference will increase the likelihood of applicants naming a local school, which should reduce homeschool transport responsibility of the local authority. It's notable that the majority of those who disagreed did so because they felt that 3 preferences are sufficient. However, again, it would not be a mandatory requirement to utilise all 4 preferences. Notably, while a few respondents anticipated an increased administrative burden, much of the process, such as the ranking of applications, is automated, and we do not expect any significant impact for schools or local authority caseworkers. Included as Appendix A is the Lincolnshire Primary School Admissions Policy. You will see that we propose a change to the published admission number at Quaidring, Cowley and Brown's Primary School from 16 to 15. This minor but purposeful adjustment helps to ensure compliance with the infant class size regulations, which limit reception Year 1 and Year 2 classes to 30 pupils per qualified teacher. A published admission number of 15 enables the school to admit to their published admission number and to plan mixed age teaching for Year 1 and Year 2 together, without needing an additional infant mixed age class. We anticipate sufficient capacity will remain for local children. For this proposal, we received 83 responses, 48% agreed, 13 disagreed, and 39 were unsure. Of the respondents, 22 lived within 5 miles of Quaidring, and 69 lived outside that radius. It is notable that, among those who lived within 5 miles of Quaidring, 81% agreed to the reduction of PAN, demonstrating strong support for those most directly impacted. Supportive comments described the change as logical and well-reasoned, helping avoid unnecessary class splits and additional staffing. Some questioned the value of a small reduction. However, although the change is minor, it is essential to ensure full compliance with the requirements of the School Admissions Code. One respondent raised concerns about reducing published admission number while local building works are ongoing. However, it is notable that projections data indicates sufficient places across the area, and we anticipate that the school will be able to accommodate all pupils for whom Quaidring, Cowley and Brown is the closest school. With regards to the admissions policy at Appendix B and C, Spalding High School's policies remain unchanged except for date amendments and sixth form course requirements. A summary of the responses for both consultations is included as Appendix G. I will now refer to the school admissions report update as listed as Appendix H. Looking at recent trends, secondary school pupil numbers have grown steadily with a slight dip in 2024 and a projected rise in 2027. On the other hand, primary numbers continue to decline, reflecting the national picture. On National Offer Day 2025, we processed 6,642 primary applications and 8,559 secondary applications across Lincolnshire. It is notable that Lincolnshire consistently outperforms both regional and national averages for parental satisfaction for primary application and falls in line with regional and national averages for secondary, as demonstrated within the update paper. In 2025, 95.7% of primary applicants and 86.94% of secondary applicants received an offer for their first preference school. When all preferences are considered, satisfaction rates rise to 99.1% for primary and 96.2% for secondary. The number of applicants allocated a place by the local authority without any of their preferred schools remains low, below 1% for primary and just 3.51% for secondary. We continue to dispel the misconception that listing only one preference improves the chances of securing a chosen school. Through targeted social media campaigns, we encourage parents to use all available preferences. We also highlight the importance of naming the closest school to the home address on the application form in order to secure a reasonable alternative if applicants are unsuccessful in obtaining a place at one of their preferred schools. The report also covers the Fair Access Protocol. The Fair Access Protocol is a locally agreed process that ensures vulnerable or hard-to-place children who have been unable to secure an in-year school place through the usual processes are allocated one quickly and fairly. It is designed to minimise the time children are out of education and requires all schools to participate in supporting timely and suitable placements. Whilst we do have a high number of referrals, the Fair Access Protocol is effective in securing places for children within the required timeframes, particularly due to the school's participation and a strong understanding of their duties under the protocol. If an applicant is unsuccessful in obtaining a place at a school they've applied for, parents and carers have a legal right to appeal against that refusal. As explained in the report, appeals are heard by independent panels, with academies organising their own appeals. They fall into three main categories: infant class size, where there is a restriction to 30 pupils per qualified teacher, and this applies to reception year 1 and year 2. Prejudice appeals, where the school feels that the admission of a further pupil may negatively impact the children within the class and the resources available, and non-qualification appeals, where a child has not reached the qualifying standard for admission to a grammar school. Lincolnshire does see a slightly higher number of appeals lodged and a higher success rate compared to other authorities in the East Midlands. This reflects the rural nature of our schools, who often have smaller cohorts which are not subject to infant class size restrictions. And the presence of selective grammar schools naturally generates more appeals, as applicants are able to appeal their qualification status as well as admission outcome. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jessica. I would now like to invite members of the committee to comment on this item. Councillor Robinson, do we have any speakers?
Yeah, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. Changing it to 4 preferences, I really hope this is not just being implemented as a get-out clause, so parents don't get their first choice in schools. Can we be assured that the system won't change, that the allocations will still be looked at fairly across the board? Thank you.
So adding the additional preference, it is discretionary for parents to use that preference, but it doesn't change how any of the applications are processed. They're still processed in line with the school's oversubscription criteria in exactly the same way. So whether you had 4 preferences or 6 preferences, the first, second, third would still have that same outcome. So it's only those ones that aren't successful in those first 3 that would actually need that 4th preference when that was needed. So when you're looking at those pupils that we would allocate where we can't allocate any of their preferences, that would benefit them because they have a 4th preference then on their application form should they have chosen to use it.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. On page 29 2A, it refers to the preference given to siblings. Completely understand. Is there a consideration given to cohabiting families where you maybe have 2 adults with their own children living together, because of course they're not technically siblings at that point? However, you've got 2 children from the same household that may be around the same age. It could potentially put those families in a difficult situation where you've got 2 children going to 2 different schools around the same age. Is there any way we could consider cohabiting families, given it's becoming more common?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Parkinson. So within a school's admissions policy, a requirement is that the policy has to be clear and defined. So we find that for academies and schools across Lincolnshire, their definition of sibling often does include children living within the same household, stepbrothers, siblings, half siblings. So it very often does account for children living under the same household who might not have a direct sibling.
That's right, because obviously just on the listing here, because it's included in the criteria and it has the 3 listed, so I didn't know if that was exclusive or whether there was slightly broader terms, because obviously children living together, not siblings, isn't included in there as all.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. On the administration of the children, is it, if they apply to the nearest school, do they go to that school? I mean, if there's 2 children, one, that lives further away, is preference given to the one who lives nearest? And also, does the policy cover secondary schools as well?
So for the primary policy, the nearest school does fall quite high as a criterion after Education, Health and Care Plan looked after children and siblings. So if 2 applicants were going for the same school, one of which lived nearer, but the school was the nearest school for both of those applicants, it would then go to straight line distance, so whichever child lived closer to the school. We find that applies for many academies as well across Lincolnshire. However, our only secondary school is Spalding High School. So again, the same would apply for Spalding High School.
Thank you. Councillor Hume.
On pages 32 and 33, you mention our support for children of those who, military personnel who have been posted to specific areas. But it's not clear to me, and if you could just clarify for me, would they take priority over the sort of reserve list?
Thank you. So there are a few arrangements that are in place for our military families. Obviously, we have a lot in Lincolnshire, so it's something we really do have to consider. Within the Admissions Code, which we must comply with, there are limitations on what priorities that we can give. So when you do have a child that's in the military, it's all about whether they would have obtained a place when the children entered the school. So to remove the disadvantage of them being maybe posted away from whatever home address they're using, we would look at whether they would have obtained a place at that time, and if so, we would ask the school whether they wish to exceed their admission limits. In some circumstances they can, if a child is top of the reserve list, but in some circumstances the admissions code limits what actions the schools can take, and in that circumstance we would advise parents to appeal, because the appeal panel, they can have a look at all the circumstances around that parent's application. And what benefit that has and how we would support military families is we frequently are in touch with our colleagues that process these applications, and we would offer support to those families to navigate that system, because that seems to be one of the biggest misconceptions, is all the different local authorities run things differently. So we just make sure that we're a frequent point of contact for any parents, so they would understand how their application would be processed and what support we could offer in making sure that they understood which places were available. Alongside that, though, one of the benefits for a military family as opposed to a different family that would be moving mid-year is that a military family can use an address in advance of a house move. So we would process that application as if that family lived at the address, whereas other families, they must already live there. And that's to remove the disadvantage that a military family may face in the processing time for an application. It allows them to apply in advance, have a place ready for when they move, and be rest assured of where they're going to be going. But it doesn't give any actual priority on the school's admissions criteria, because that wouldn't be accepted within the admissions code. So it's sort of facilitating those families to navigate the system as opposed to facilitating them to get a school that they would prefer. I hope that clarifies, but let me know if it's need any more information.
Thank you, that's brilliant.
Thank you. Just a question from myself. So the scheme allows parents to apply until February the 12th, 2027, despite the national closing date being January 15th. Does this create any challenges with coordinating with neighbouring local authorities?
Thank you. It doesn't create difficulties in coordinating with other local authorities, although we would like to see that extended deadline a mandatory thing within the admissions code, because it's really beneficial, particularly in the military county that we are, where people move later, but also to support those families that have missed that deadline. One of the benefits of having our coordinated scheme and other local authorities having theirs in the same way, we must set it 18 months in advance. So as long as the other local authorities know what dates we're working to, and we make sure we abide by them, there really is no huge difficulty between the authorities, because we know we run that date and we know that other local authorities run others. But we also do try to collaborate with them to make sure that their dates are as closely aligned as possible.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Councillor Daish.
Thank you. Just a quick question on people that move in the area that have got different children at different ages. How do you work out what schools they're allowed to go to? And as the children get older, can they go to the same school as the older siblings were put in?
Thank you. So yes, for any families that are moving to the area with children in different year groups, the local authority's duty is to find a suitable school place for both the children, and we wouldn't necessarily take into consideration the fact that they are siblings that must be placed in the same school. So we will offer a place at the next nearest school with a place available. Families are able to apply for schools with spaces for both children, and they could transport both their children to the same school at the same time if that's what they wanted to do. However, once an application is made, and if it is declined, you are added to the reserve list anyway. So if a place became available, then the sibling could join the other sibling at the preferred school. There's also the appeals route. If a family don't get both of their children into the same school, we would encourage parents to go down the appeal route, where they can present this information to an independent panel. And as we said earlier, an independent panel does have more discretion to consider external factors that we as a local authority wouldn't be able to. So, for example, having two siblings at the same school, which many families do think is important.
Can I just add to that just a tiny bit? Most of the policies within the county do account for siblings when they're looking at their oversubscription criteria. So if the school does have a space in both year groups, then predominantly children will be placed together. I think Jessica's response is about what happens if we can't offer the same school. But if somebody's moved in and their sibling is joining the school then at the normal point of admission, the fact that the school has siblings within its oversubscription criteria is what would normally place them together. There are schools that don't have siblings within their oversubscription criteria, but they are predominantly grammar schools where it's all about qualification.
Just to clarify, if the children different ages, so perhaps one is in an infant school and one is in a senior school, the age gap is that much that when that child is ready to go to the senior school, will that child be able to go to the senior school the same as the older child?
So most sibling definitions don't account for children that have left the school, because the logistical difficulty of getting two children to a school wouldn't necessarily be the same when a child has left. However, if a child has obtained a place through the normal admissions round, predominantly the criteria don't change very regularly, so you would expect that the children would normally obtain a place if they've been living at the same address. But patterns of parental preference do change every year, so you can't guarantee that a child can get priority for a place because their sibling has previously attended.
Sorry, can I come in, Chair? So I think what Councillor Dash is saying, two people move into Lincolnshire and we can't place in the nearest school. One goes to an infant, the older child goes to a different school. When that child is ready to join its sibling, even though it's further away than the nearest secondary, is it allowed to join its sibling, or does it have to go to the nearest secondary?
I see. Sorry, I misunderstood that question completely then. The sibling criteria does differ per school, but predominantly, if your sibling's at the school, it isn't related to whether it's the nearest school or not. So within the, we've got the primary policy really predominantly for schools that Lincolnshire County Council are the admission authority for, but sibling would be a higher priority whether it's your nearest school or not. So if that scenario has happened and we've had to place further away from home, yes, the sibling rule does predominantly count, but it is important to note that when you're following a child onto school, it's usually to secondary school and we don't have control directly over their policy, so it does depend per academy. However, they are usually very interested in placing siblings together for the benefits that has for families.
And can I just highlight where there is a challenge is that where we've placed further away from home, our transport eligibility will kick in. So if they're more than 3 miles away, and if parents choose to send their sibling to the same school and it's parental preference and there is a space near, our transport eligibility wouldn't kick in. So you'd have one child from one address would qualify for school transport, the other one wouldn't, and that's because we placed one, the other was parental preference, and we can't create eligibility on parental preference.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. Just another one on 3A, the nearest school. Obviously, it's done on effectively how the crow flies. I understand why that's probably the easiest way to do it. I suppose the only point of consideration would be, particularly in urban areas, sometimes it's difficult to look as the crow flies because of how busy. You know, if you try and go through Lincoln at 9 AM in the morning, it's horrific. It can take you forever and a day. It might be a mile closer, but actually in terms of your travel time, it's not even close. So I know it's difficult, but is there any way that we can give consideration to the actual travel time in urban areas as opposed to just as the crow flies, or would it become too complicated effectively?
Shall I'll come in, and then if you want to add. So I think we've done it that way before, and I think that this was a long time ago. I'm going back 20 odd years when my own experience of applying for a school place in Lincolnshire. I think there's all kinds of levels of complexity to that, and the fairness of it and the unfairness of it. So if you haven't got a car and you have to walk, your travel time is different to somebody who's got a car. So I might live really close to the school, but it takes me 10 minutes to walk. You might say, well, I've got a car and I can get there in 5, therefore I should get the place above them. So that's why it's all those things that are, it's a really complex area, and Jess and Emily are explaining it really well, but I think probably we've been through considering an awful lot of those both nationally and locally, and we've landed on where the crow flies overall.
Can I just add as well, if that is an instance and a family has been offered a place that perhaps is close on a map, but in real terms travelling to that school is particularly difficult for them, again, the correct route for that would be to go down the appeals process and apply for your preferred school and explain the rationale behind that. And you know, an appeal panel can consider things that the local authority can't. They do have a wider scope for what they can consider.
Thank you. Councillor Cleaver.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. I fully support going to 4 choices. I don't see why one wouldn't offer more people more choice. Seems an obvious thing to me. I would comment, of course, that a lot of the policies only kick in if schools are oversubscribed, and in a lot of cases they're not. So you know, it's not as difficult a situation as people sometimes like to imagine. And I know that again from my experience dealing with casework in my division. And thank you, because every time I ask you for statistics to my division, you always give them to me very quickly, and I'm very grateful for that. I think it's worth commenting for purposes of the other members of the committee, the difference between the initial offer letters and then what happens in the end. And I know that I got into a little bit of a panic last year when I saw the initial offers, because lots of people were offered places that they hadn't even put a preference down for. And it was only later that I learnt and realised that that was the distorting effect of people that were going to go to private school anyway. If they didn't get the one choice they wanted at the grammar school, they had no intention of going anywhere else with it in the maintained system. So it does beg the question as to whether those people are excluded from our figures if they don't get their first preference, because obviously they do distort the figures. And I wonder whether we, when you do when we do the application form, whether we should actually ask people, if you have put fewer than 2 preferences, why is that? Is there a reason that we need to know about? Because otherwise, you know, I think it makes it easier for us to understand what the true demand actually is. And I would also emphasise, I think, the need for us all as elected members to support the idea that we do need to encourage people to actually fill in as many preferences as they can that are viable for them, and not do the thing about thinking that if you put your number 1 choice down, you're more likely to get it. We keep hearing this year in, year out, and I know you do a lot of comms about it. We see them all the time, but I think it is, as community leaders, I think elected members do have a role in backing that up within their communities as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I echo what you're saying. Any opportunity to drum home that message that using your preferences is a good thing, because you're not disadvantaged in any way by listing more preferences. It only serves to benefit, because you, if you've listed 1 preference, you're no less likely to get that 1 preference if you've listed 3. So we do use every opportunity to reinforce that message, and we're hoping that by adding the additional preference, that will also put a spotlight on parental preference, and it will really enable us to have those positive conversations with parents. Unfortunately, though, we can't do anything to ask further information about why they've listed their preference, because there's a limit on what we can ask under the admissions code, and it's very strict in terms of making sure that we can only gather information that's relevant for an application. So we can't physically do that with the computer system that we use, but we also wouldn't be able to do it under the code. But I do recognise why you think that would be a benefit. I think we've had those conversations behind the scenes and with our DFE colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further speakers? No?
Yeah, just last 2 questions from me, So in relation to the proposal to increase the number of school preferences from 3 to 4, what modelling has been undertaken to demonstrate whether this have an impact on school placements, and how will the impact of this proposal be monitored to see if it's making any difference?
Thank you. So the impact that it will have would potentially be on those pupils that are allocated none of their preferred schools, because they are the only ones that would actually need that 4th preference processing. But saying that, a lot of those parents that that don't get offered any of their preferences haven't used their 3 preferences. So what we really need to do is examine the success of going to 4 preferences alongside the work that we will do with families to make sure that they understand why we've added an additional preference and what benefits that serves. So it ties into the information from Councillor Cleaver. So it's going to be very difficult to do one in isolation to say it's just the 4 preferences, because hopefully the social media campaign and the additional work that we can do on the back of this will be really positive for families. But we will make sure that we're looking to make sure that it's not having a negative impact, but also that we take every opportunity to reinforce the message throughout that process.
Okay, and just my last question. With regards to the proposed change to the published admissions number PAN at Quadring, Cowley and Brown's Primary School from 16 to 15, why is the PAN currently set at 16, given the issues this creates with the infant class size limit of 30, and is this school currently over or under subscribed?
I think I left my microphone on, sorry. So it's a very good question about why the PAN is at 16. It is a historic PAN. Infant class size regulations didn't historically exist, so they're not a new thing, but some of these PANs are very historic. We have looked to reduce PANs where they don't make necessarily logistical sense, but at the moment, Quaidring, Cowley and Browns are doing 2 mixed age classes if they are oversubscribed. Some of their year groups are, some aren't, predominantly though they aren't, which means that they are able to still operate in the way that they would be operating should this change be made. But what this will do is make sure that that scenario can continue, which supports the financial viability of the school, particularly because they would know that they could have that set staffing structure in the future. Whereas at the moment, should they get to classes of 16, then they have to make sure that their curriculum model can accommodate that. So really, it's a historic PAN, but with the regulations, it would make sense to just give them that assurance.
Okay, thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I propose that we support the 5 recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Children's Services and that our comments be passed on to the Executive Councillor. Can I please have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Staines. The comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, for passing on to the Executive Councillor. We will now vote on this item. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you. That's been carried. We'll now move on to item 8, Quality and Standard Services Learning and Development Training Programme Procurement. This item is on pages 103 to 126 and is for pre-discussion scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive Councillor for Children's Services between the 2nd and 6th of February 2026. The actions required by the committee are to consider the attachment report and determine whether the committee supports the recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Children's Services, agree and additional comments to be passed on to the Executive Councillor in relationship to this item. This report will be presented by Mark Rainey, Children's Services Strategic Commissioning Manager. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So the report today is outlining to you that the Quality and Standards team within Children's Services oversees quite a wide-ranging learning and development programme for its staff and also some targeted groups such as foster carers. That programme is a mix of statutory, internally mandatory and best practice training, with the majority of it actually being delivered in-house. However, some elements are to be commissioned externally due to requiring specific expertise. So we've undertaken a review recently that identified that the current procurement arrangements are inefficient and unable to meet fluctuating training demands. And with several contracts due to expire on the 31st of March 2026, that prompted us to have a look at the need for a new procurement methodology. The report recommends establishing an open light touch framework lasting up to 8 years to procure the external training. That framework will streamline the procurement, support compliance with procurement regulations, enable quicker call-offs, and support a one council approach by allowing other directorates to use the framework. We've seen the Children's Services workforce grow quite recently due to the opening of some new residential homes, the insourcing of the Leaving Care Service, some legislative changes and Ofsted requirements, and also some of the DFE initiatives at which we've been at the forefront of. That's increased demand for training, that's increased our spend on training within Children's Services, and what we're finding is that the current procurement methodology is ineffective. We've undertaken a 5-year forecast that estimates that the external training will cost 1.075 million. However, that doesn't include as yet unknown DFE initiative requirements, where we might be involved in particular things like Pathfinder or Family Hubs development, and that often means that we have additional training requirements. It also doesn't include the additional significant training costs we expect from the new staff that we will be recruiting as part of the implementation of the new secure unit at Millennium Lodge. It also doesn't include any spend that we may want to include from our colleagues in other directorates. So we're proposing a framework value of up to 5 million to ensure that we've got some long-term flexibility. That light touch framework then will reduce some ad hoc procurement that we sometimes have to do because of the fluctuating demand levels. It should, in the long term, improve value for money, increase competition, streamline the way that we purchase the training, and hopefully ensure enough flexibility to commission the training services while doing so in a compliant way. It should also mean that we can then meet emerging needs as they happen more efficiently than we potentially do at this moment in time. And we're looking to implement this from the 1st of April 2026. And that's a very brief overview, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mark. I would like now to invite members of the committee to comment on this item. Councillor Robson, do we have any speakers?
Yeah, Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. Just a question around this funding, because obviously you're allocating around £1 million mark, as you mentioned, but you're going to allocate up to 5 million, but it's not guaranteed that we'd spend the 5 million. So in terms of a funding source, if you don't spend the 5 million, what happens to the rest of that money, or where is the money going to come from to fund the top up?
So thank you very much. So, and Mark will probably explain this bit a bit better than me. So this would allow us to call off if we needed it. And so it's about establishing a framework where we can get things at better value. We know we want the amount that we're putting in and we've got the budget for that. If we wanted more, or if adults wanted more, or if the Safeguarding Partnership wanted more, they will be able to benefit, but they will need to do that through their own budget setting processes. So when we, for example, when we when we open the new secure unit, that's a much bigger secure unit with a lot more young people in it, and the paper will be coming, the paper's been through, but the staffing bit. Once we do that, we already know we're going to need to keep their training up to date. We'll be funded for that through the Ministry of Justice, and for every place, because they don't tend to be Lincolnshire children placed in the secure unit, they tend to be from all over the country. So that funding will come in. This framework will stop us from having to come back every time and saying, can we get some training for another 60 members of staff, because it will be, but the budget will be monitored and through the budget processes that go through this committee, through exec. So we fully anticipate that we'll, when we open the secure unit, and that will be in next year's budget proposals, we'll be getting a significant budget uplift around that. It's an in and out. We're spending it on the kids we get. It's a service that is commissioned from us. So what this framework does is give us protection to get the lower price contract for more things as and when they come up, but the budget process will be the same. It doesn't mean that we would be able to spend an additional amount of money without having council oversight. It's just saying we've built that in for when that comes, because we know some of it's coming.
And I suppose just to say that I think the issue with the framework is under the procurement regulations, there's a limit to how much we can expand it by. So if we do set it too low, we might not be able to expand it sufficiently to be able to meet some of those new requirements. So the purpose of it is to make sure that we've hopefully got excess, but some of our training requirements are as yet unknown, and I suppose you could call them known unknowns because we know they will happen. You know, many years ago we wouldn't have been doing some of the training that we're currently having to do, so we know that things will develop and emerge within children's services, so it's about making sure that we've got that flexibility to be able to do it as and when we need it, without having to then set up a new framework which takes a lot of administration time.
Thank you. Just a few questions from me. So it just says that there's the option to reopen the framework periodically and invite new suppliers to join. How often are we looking to do this to ensure that we're continuing to benefit from competitive market rates? And just with regards to the other directorates, what interest have they had? And is there any examples of how that could be utilised? Thank you.
So generally, we would look at probably an annual reopening. That would be what we would be looking to stipulate within the original documentation, and we'll try and specify when the annual reopening will be. There may also be an occasion where we do have a new requirement that we were unable to specify at the outset, where we may need to reopen it when that new requirement becomes necessary, and then we would invite suppliers to join who may be specialists in that particular new type of training, or as different things emerge. In terms of other directorates, we are aware that our colleagues and adults do some health and safety training, and also corporately there's some health and safety training. There has been some interest from colleagues, and that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure the framework is not children's services specific. So we're doing all of the paperwork so that it could be used right the way across the council. And as I say earlier, with looking at the overall value, we're trying to make sure that whilst we know we'll have some unknowns that may come to fruition during the course of 8 years, I'm assuming they'll likewise have something that they might not know about that they may need in 3, 4, 5 years' time.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hume.
It's just a question around statutory and mandatory training. Have these modules changed very much in the last few years? I don't imagine they have. And it may be my ignorance, perhaps, coming to the fore here, but when I worked in the NHS, we had statutory and mandatory modules, which I presume are quite similar. And these were free. They weren't paid for via e-learning for health because it was all automated. Do we pay for those statutory and mandatory modules?
Sorry. Oh, apologies, Heather. I thought I could come in. So the statutory and mandatory courses that are referred to in the appendix are just those that we need to commission. So just the ones that we need to pay for. So we do get lots of statutory and mandatory training that is provided through the LSCP, for example. And these are the ones that are quite specialist, where we feel the technical knowledge is better supplied by an external provider, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
And I suppose it's just worthwhile adding that where we do have some requirements for additional training as part of some of the DFE initiatives, then obviously the funding that comes with those DFE initiatives helps us to fund that training. So, it's a bit like what Heather was saying. Sometimes it's money in and then money out. So it's along those lines.
Thank you. Any further speakers? Councillor Smith.
Sorry. Can I just quickly ask, if you're training new staff on a rolling basis and they leave within their sort of non-contract time, probation period, do they have to pay then for the training they've received, or is it still free?
Thank you. No, Councillor Smith. So we don't get a significant amount of attrition in that period. Just to be clear, most staff do stay with us, and we have a good retention. But no, we have to provide this training. So if we are going to allow or encourage people to go and work in a residential home, we have to make sure they're trained in all the things they need to be trained in before they go in there. Now, if they don't stay in that home for more than a year or two, then we would have to train the next person, and that is the reality. And we do have a bit of turnover in our residential estate because it is a job that people, to be fair, can come into genuinely wanting to do, and then when you get into it, it's not for you because it is whereas other people absolutely love it and build their career around residential. So I think no, we don't, but that wouldn't stop us doing the training. Whereas we have other training that is much longer term and more expensive. For example, when we say we would like to train somebody to be a social worker, and that takes 3 years, and it's that's an expensive piece of training for us. We do have a retention on that, so they do have to work for us for a certain period of time, or there would be a clawback. But on these training, it's about making sure people have got the tools for the job. Thanks.
Thank you. If there's no further speakers, that's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Just 2 questions from me, Mark, sorry. On page 110, the report mentions that the Open Light Touch framework is a new development under the Procurement Act 2023. It sounds like there will be benefits to using this, but what do you envisage will be the challenges of using this new framework?
I think the key challenge we'll have is just making sure that the way that we set it up gives us the flexibility that we're envisaging having in the longer term to be able to procure training to meet needs. So it's about making sure we get all of our I's dotted, T's crossed when we're setting it out to the marketplace so that we don't run the risk of challenge further down the line. That's a project that we're already on with because we've got quite tight time scales on this, so we're already working on that with our colleagues in legal, the commercial lawyers, to try and make sure that we can get the most of the benefits that we think the framework will deliver for us.
And last question, on Appendix A details the different courses that are provided to staff, some of which seem genetic rather than child specific, such as first aid and moving and handling people. Are any of those courses provided by adult care or corporately which child services could utilise and piggyback onto reduced costs?
Yeah, I think that's, as we were discussing earlier, they're the type of courses that we had in mind when we had the discussions with our colleagues and adults. And often it's about making sure we can align contractual end dates. This framework will hopefully overcome that over the course of time. If they recognise they will be able to use it, then we'll be in a position where hopefully we could join forces and benefit from some economies of scale.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion on this item. I propose that we support the two recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Children's Services and that our comments be passed on to the Executive Councillor. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Parkinson, thank you. The comments from the committee's discussion on this report have been recorded by Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer, for passing on to the Executive Councillor. We will now vote on this item. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. Thank you, that is carried. Item 9, Children's and Culture Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. This item is on pages 127 to 136 of the agenda pack and sets out the work programme of the Children's and Culture Scrutiny Committee. The action required by the committee are to review and agree the committee's work programme as set out in this report, highlight for the discussions any additional scrutiny activity which could be considered for inclusion in the work programme. The report will be presented by Tracy Johnson, Senior Scrutiny Officer. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have one amendment to report to the work programme. For the 24th of April agenda, we have an additional item in relation to the proposed SEND hubs, and this will be for 5 schools, which are the Hawthorne Tree School at Boston, Butterwick Pinchwick Edowd CFE Primary School, Sleaford Church Lane Primary School and Nursery, Thetford the Edward Richardson Primary School, and Lincolnshire Francis Hill Community Primary School. And that will be before decisions between the 27th of April and the 1st of May. So that's an additional item for the April agenda. In terms of the next meeting, it will be on the 6th of March. We currently have 6 items for this meeting. So there'll be the Q3 performance report from Joe and Nicole. We've got a few decision reports in relation to the Best Start Lincolnshire Inclusive Service Commissioning, Lincolnshire Council for Voluntary Youth Services grant funding, and the Ancaster Primary School Block 4 demolition and rebuild. And in addition, we've got 2 items in relation to the Best Start in Life Strategy and Action Plan, and the Attendance in Schools, Elective Home Education and Children Missing Education annual report that comes through on a yearly basis. Happy to take any suggestions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tracy. I would like now to invite comments of the work programme. Councillor Robson, do we have any speakers?
Yep, Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Tracy. So apart from the regular service level performance report that's, standard, it's a standing item on the 6th of March, we've got a third of the year, a third of 2026, with no scheduled scrutiny reports from culture services. So I refer the committee back to my previous comment where I said culture services, while it's a small part of the executive member's portfolio, it still uses public money. So the last time we discussed a culture services item, I asked for it specifically. So when are we going to get something on libraries? For example, Grantham, Bourne, Boston, Lincoln Central, the new contract. When are we going to get something on archives, the 5-year capacity and staffing needs? Battle of Britain Memorial Flight Visitors Centre, Museum of Lincolnshire Life, and Lincoln Castle Illuminated. All these, I'm sure, will be of great interest, not only to members of this committee, but the public who pay for them and use them. Thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you, Councillor Gorey. Yeah, we'll take that into consideration and discuss that with officers. Sorry, Nicole.
That's okay. No, you've answered that eloquently. What I would say is that there is a paper that's coming that confirms about the library contract. Obviously, scrutiny is also about, you know, the key decisions on statutory services as opposed to simply about information providing. What I would say to balance is the time and exposure that culture has had in this scrutiny so far since it's been amalgamated actually is greater, significantly greater than it was under its previous community safety and public protection scrutiny. However, as the Chair has said, if you want any further details about those service-specific information, officers will be more than happy to provide that.
Thank you. Was there a question from Councillor Clark? Was it?
Yeah, well, what is a question? It's agreeing with my fellow councillor, but I'm saying again, I don't think culture should sit in this committee. I mean, why don't we put highways with it as well then?
Okay. Councillor Cleaver.
Thank you. I was going to suggest an item, but I noticed that 6th of March will be too late, relating to marking the centenary of the birth of Her Late Majesty on the 21st of April. So obviously we can't put that on the scrutiny, but if we could be told what is being planned for that, if anything, I think I'd be grateful for that. The other thing that I've been meaning to ask for ages, actually, is about the Lincolnshire Schools Music Service, or the Lincolnshire Music Service, which is the service for schools. It is separately funded through government. The money does come through our accounts. Does anyone scrutinise it, its performance? It would be nice to have the opportunity for people to learn more about it and for us to showcase what it does.
Thank you, Councillor Cleaver. So, yes, the Lincolnshire Music Service is brilliant and does a really good job and has really good coverage. Its reporting and its governance comes through our internal SLT, because education SLT. So my head of service who oversees that reports on its functions financially, etc. Again, similar to Nicole, if a briefing note of impact and performance is of interest, we're happy to provide it.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you. Not on this, but on the previous scrutiny committee, we mentioned about the Stamford Mercury Archive Trust. Myself and Richard have the meeting coming up shortly. They're still due to be made homeless, so I just wondered if somebody would be able to reach out to them just to offer some assistance around if there's anything else CC can do to support them. For those that haven't been to the Archive Trust, it is brilliant. So if that's possible, if someone could reach out to them and include me and Richard in the emails, much appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. Actually, probably over a year ago now, myself and a couple of colleagues went down and we visited. It's an amazing resource. It's absolutely incredible. It's some of the old newspapers are beautiful, and just looking back and just sort of seeing all of the incredible stories is absolutely fantastic. It's not the biggest archive in the world, but it's still fairly sizable, and to do it justice and look after it, it's not something you want to just put anywhere. There hasn't been as yet, any kind of opportunity we've come across to be able to offer any more support. Our own archives are under pressure from a space perspective as well. This is something we will be bringing to a future scrutiny. I'm happy to have another conversation with them. They're great people. There's people there I've known for over 20 years. But there is a limit due to the cost, and I know the risk is that it could actually leave the county. It won't be lost, but it will be lost to the county.
Yeah, I suppose my thought process, if there's anything we can do to support, for example, with negotiations with, for example, SKDC or the town council. I know that Stamford Town Council would probably be fairly keen to have it remain in Stamford. So if there's anything we can do to support them in terms of not a financial cost, but just as a resource help to help them find a new home, because it is absolutely brilliant and needs to be kept in Stamford, really.
I 100% agree. Of course, in terms of kind of expertise, knowledge and support, very happy to do so. We have fully qualified archivists. We're working with Stamford Town Council on another potential development, and there has been a conversation about whether or not those could be aligned. That one's been undergo for about 5 years. These things don't always move very quickly. Again, these are the kind of things that sometimes the synchronicity means that, because actually it takes a bit longer, something else pops up. So it's absolutely something that we'll keep an eye on. But I'm very happy to reach out to them again.
Thank you. Any further speakers? No, I'd just like to make a counter argument that used to be that there used to be an Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee, two massive sort of portfolios that were together on one scrutiny. So it's not that, strange to have this, that there's two sort of areas together. But yeah, I just want to highlight a counter argument. That's it. Thanks.
No, thank you. I just want to highlight, Lincolnshire Archives is wonderful, and I can't wait for the Lincoln Museum as well for its renovations. Absolute delight. And if there's no further questions, I just want to thank all council members for your questions and comments. And now this concludes this discussion on this item. I propose that we approve the planned work programme subject to the consideration of any item highlighted in today's discussion. Can we please raise your hand if you agree? Any abstentions? Thank you. That is agreed. That now concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance.